Chuck Rainey is one of the most recorded musicians on the planet. For over 2 decades, he played on almost everything you heard, from TV shows like Sanford and Son and The Jeffersons to iconic artists such as the Jackson 5, Aretha Franklin, Quincy Jones, Steely Dan, Joe Cocker, Jackson Browne, Dizzy Gillespie, Bob Marley, Diana Ross, Smokey Robinson, and even Louis Armstrong, to name a few. His bass playing can be heard on over 1,000 albums, so chances are, if you've listened to any of the great music from the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, you heard Chuck Rainey. He is, in short, one of the greatest electric bass players of all time. Hi, I'm Ronnie Wilson, producer here at Boarded Up Music. Now, I first met Chuck Rainey almost 40 years ago when we were playing together in the same band. Now, anybody that's ever known Chuck knows he's a very quiet and unassuming man and doesn't like to talk about himself. So it was years before I really began to understand he was more than just some badass bass player I knew. This first episode will focus on Chuck's early professional years with the legendary King Curtis, touring with the Beatles, and even playing with Jimi Hendrix. We hope you'll enjoy.
He was known to all jazz saxophone players as number one, top saxophone player. And they all came out of the woodwork whenever they could, especially at matinees, to sit in with the band, because he had a very good band. You know, I'm proud of that. We were a very good band. We played society gigs, we played rock and roll gigs, we played all kinds of gigs. We backed the Supremes, we backed Chuck Berry, we backed the Coasters. Anybody that was on tour and they came through New York, we were the backup band. He was a session player. Just about everybody that came out of his band ended up being the studio musicians. And so he was on call to take solos. So the Coasters, Yakety Yak, they coined him the Yakety Sax Man. So he played a lot of solos on a lot of R&B records. I kind of think that's what helped all of us once we left his band to get involved in the studio. Because if you were in his band, 2 things were obvious. You were a good musician and you could read. But King Curtis was a very strong man. I got much pleasure. I'm not from Texas, but I came out of his band, and he's from Fort Worth, and Cornell Dupree was a guitar player who came out of Fort Worth. So I find myself living right in the neck of the woods of my 2 favorite people, 2 of my most favorite people, as far as how you carry yourself. You mentioned that again, how you carry yourself, how you talk to people, how you receive what's being told to you. You know, sometimes with King Curtis, he would turn to me on the bandstand, and he would say, your G string is out of tune. Now, sometimes I haven't been perfect all my career, but I don't think I'm out of tune. I think it sounded good to me, but the band leader said, you're out of tune. So sometimes, plus he was my size. Now, when you're bigger than somebody, you have a tendency to rear up sometimes, but he was my size. And so he's the band leader. So you don't rear up as somebody your size, and he's the band leader. Because like I mentioned to you early in our conversation, the way I came up in New York, if you don't satisfy the band leader, he's going to get somebody else. And if you're in New York City, there are a lot of bass players that play just as good as you do. You know, he just have to be able to trust and get along with someone in his band. You know, so band leaders should be that way. You have to trust the musicians that are working with you, that you control them. You have to be controlled. You know, you're a musician, you know what it's like not to be controlled.
I'm not going to say anything. Chuck, does my memory serve me correctly? Didn't Jimi Hendrix get his start with King Curtis?
He got his start with Little Richard. That's where we got it. He was in the band for 6 months.
I've known you 40 years and I'm still learning this stuff. Wow.
He was in our band for 6 months. But we got him from Little Richard. Little Richard had just come back from his preaching thing that he was doing. He came back. He had 2 guitar players, 2 drummers, and 2 bass players. The band wasn't good at all, except for Jimmy. You know, he made it all happen. And they have photos of King Curtis's band with me and Jimmy and Cornell Dupree.
That's right, Cornell was in that band too, huh? So what was that? What was he like?
Well, he was very flamboyant. He wore ruffled shirts. And he was an act, sort of, kind of a 15-minute act. Curtis always had someone that came on stage with the band as an act, featuring so-and-so and so-and-so.
Okay.
We had the James Brown impersonator. We had other people singing. But Jimmy came up because he licked his guitar and he looked differently. And he sang and played Lightning Hopkins kind of blues, you know. So he was an act. Very, very lovely person, by the way.
Really?
Very, very nice man. When I look at the film, the Jimi Hendrix movie,
right?
I don't know what Jimi Hendrix they knew, because that wasn't the Jimmy that I knew. He was not braggedy. I think that the movie depicted him as being a braggart, know-it-all kind of guy. He was not that way at all. He was very, very humble and soft-spoken. Now, he may have changed, but when he was in the band, he was another guy. And we all liked him a whole lot. Very, very good guitar player. He was left-handed, as everybody knows, but he played the guitar left-handed and right-handed. He also played upside down and regularly strung. So he could play it left-handed, upside down, and he could play it right-handed, strung regularly, or if it was upside down, he could still play it. A very unique person when it came to the guitar. Very, very unique. Played excellent bass. Buddy Miles' Them Changes.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix was playing the bass.
I'll be dang. I didn't know that.
Jimi Hendrix is playing the bass.
It's been a hard day.
King Curtis was probably where you...
Also, he was a break. Because from here we got to be, the 65 Beatles tour.
I mean, that's crazy to me. I knew you all these years, and it wasn't until recently that I realized you toured with the Beatles. And what year was this? 65 or
65.
Golly. So, you just get to New York, you finally wind up in a decent, band. The next thing you know, you're traveling with the Beatles. That must have been an eye-opening experience.
Oh, yeah, but you don't realize how big it is until it's over. Again, band members are usually not privy to what's really going on. And we didn't know who the Beatles were. We didn't listen to that kind of music. We didn't, the Beatles, just a name for a band. So we didn't know who they were. So by the time the tour got into full swing, we understood that we were a part of something very, very big. Well, that was the first time that I flew on a plane that was just dedicated to musicians. And it was a big sucker. It was a 747.
Wow.
But it had 7 acts on it, including the Beatles. The whole tour flew in a 747. All the acts were together. We were always together from city to city. And that's kind of exciting when you land and you look out and you see who's reading the plane.
So did you get to meet them? Or, you're on the plane. That must have been crazy.
Well, we spent a lot of time with George and John. No time at all with Ringo and John. They stayed away from everybody.
You mean Paul?
Paul.
Yeah.
Paul and Ringo were very, we called at the time very, special. They stayed in their part of the plane. But George and John were always with us,
Really?
always with us. They were great, great to be around.
That must have just been crazy feeling, huh?
Well, it was, but again, like I tell a lot of young people, that can be exciting. But your job is to play bass for King Curtis, because if you don't, he's going to get somebody else. And it was a good gig. So I had to look at a music stand, number one. And I'm working with a leader who expects you to be paying attention. It's a big tour. There ain't no reruns, And you know that the people are there when you walk on stage, but you can't let that affect what you're doing. So your eyes are here on the music stand and to the band leader. We were always that way. So I would think that during that whole tour, yes, it was exciting going to and from the gig, and security, police, and all kinds of stuff. That's very exciting. People screaming and reaching for you. I'm just a bass player. Well, this woman wants a piece of my clothes. Only because I'm with...
Yeah, you're on the
So
stage.
that's exciting. But it never really dawns on you until maybe a year later, or even in the past. And as time passes, that you realize how instrumental that was and how important that was. He was like a second father. We were always dressed properly. We always handled ourselves properly. Usually, when you go into a club, patrons who like the band and like you want to buy you a drink. So I learned through King Curtis that that helps the bar if they want to buy you a drink. Except you take the drink, you take a sip, and you leave it. And always make an excuse that you are in the band and you have to go by and meet people, but you leave your drink there rather than drink it. Because during the course of a night, people may buy me 7 drinks, and I don't drink. So I'm glad that I learned how to take a sip, sit it down, continue the conversation, and then leave, rather than get drunk.
He seems like he was like a disciplinarian.
Very. He had 2 cars. One, him and his assistant drove, and the band had the other car. No cigarette smoking in the car. If you're going to smoke a cigarette, if you have to smoke, park and smoke outside the car. Drugs, totally out. Hair Belafonte the same way. No red eyes allowed.
Wow.
None at all. And it's an immediate fire. And the band was so good, we could do without a drummer for an hour. We could do without a guitar player or a keyboard player or a bass player, because the musicians were that good. But they were very disciplined. Very, very disciplined. Being careful about on the break where you go, where not to go. Because if you have a problem, they're not going to help. Probably they would, depending on what the problem is. But after you leave the bandstand and go on a break and you get arrested or you get into a fight, it's on you.
Did King Curtis actually care about his band members as individuals?
But I like you. Because that's a very interesting question. You never know.
Yeah.
You never know. Because sometimes we have to pretend to get a job, to pretend, not to pretend to like somebody, but we all have different personalities and characters. You can like somebody, but not like the way they talk or like the way that they interact. So we never really know. All we know is what's up front. So with King Curtis, you never know. He was an exceptional man, and he wasn't influenced. Musically, he was a genius and a giant. I don't play a saxophone, but I do tell you something. When I know his tone and how he executes when I ever hear his music, and it inspires me to do the right thing here, because I want to make him happy. I want to make him happy. I want to make the band leader happy. I want it to be okay. Were you happy with me?
Yeah.
Now, of course, in that setting, it was kind of hard to tell. sometimes because of so many people coming and going. But I just want the band leader and the musicians to be happy with me, because even if I don't get paid, it's going to represent a dollar sign somewhere else along the line, because I was seen doing this, or I did this. There's a time to charge, there's a time not to, there's a time to accept, there's a time to refuse, there's a time and place for everything.
Where's Joey?
To everything.
That's what I was looking for. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Backstage with Chuck Rainey. And stay tuned, we've got more episodes to come. Thank you for watching. Is that all right? Is that all right, Jasmine?
Remind me to talk a little bit about your fair. I
Yeah.
don't mind, because what a pain in the ass.